Z-War correspondents urge not to trust the Kremlin media, which initially provide deliberately false information about the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. Thus, in the Pokrovsk area, there is no encirclement of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, just as there is no forward movement on the part of Putin's army. At the same time, in some sections of the front in the Pokrovsk area, the enemy is abandoning its positions under the attacks of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Russian war correspondents write that the Ukrainian Armed Forces are doing well with their reserves. The enemy has suffered heavy losses in the area of Volchansk and Kupyansk. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are striking Putin's army with both artillery and drones. On average, the enemy advances 80 meters per week, but then retreats just as quickly. Operation Kupiansk Pipe has failed miserably. Ukrainian artillery has covered everyone who was in it or near it. The enemy also has heavy losses in the Sumy region. In the Yunakovka area, Putin's army is sitting in deep defense, and the daily losses of the Russian armed forces are up to 35 soldiers and officers. Information from propaganda media about the mass surrender of Ukrainian servicemen does not correspond to reality. Z channels also complained about China, which refused to allocate funding to Russia for the construction of a new gas pipeline. Let us recall that in the area of Kupiansk and Volchansk, the artillery of the Ukrainian armed forces does not allow the enemy to penetrate into the cities with large forces. A Russian military blogger claimed that Putin's army has advanced to the northeastern outskirts of Kupiansk, as well as to the western and central parts of the city itself. Russian troops attacked in the area of Kupiansk itself, in the area of miserably and Kondratovka, in the area of Figorovka, and in the direction of Petro-Ivanovka, in the area of Petropavlovka and Kondratovka, and in the area of Stepova-Novoselovka. On September the 14th, the 10th Army Corps of the Ukrainian Armed Forces reported that Ukrainian troops were continuing counter-sabotage operations in the Kupiansk and its environs following recent attempts by the Russian armed forces to penetrate Kupiansk through an underground pipeline. The 10th Army Corps of the Ukrainian Armed Forces reported that Ukrainian forces are conducting fire control over the exit of the pipeline that Russian troops used to advance, and 3 of the 4 pipelines in the Kupiansk area are damaged or flooded. This suggests that Russian forces will only be able to use one pipeline for such operations. On September the 12th, Ukrainian sources reported that Russian forces had attempted to advance behind Ukrainian positions in Kupiansk using a pipeline with an entrance near Liman Pervy and an exit near Radkivka, and that Ukrainian drone strikes had since made the pipeline impassable. Z publics also admit that the Russian armed forces are currently advancing only in the Donetsk and Zaporizhia directions. In the area of Volchansk and Kupyansk, Putin's army has suffered very heavy losses due to artillery and drones of the Ukrainian armed forces. In these areas, the enemy advances up to 80 meters per week, but then often retreats under the blows of the Ukrainian armed forces. The Security Service of Ukraine presented new suspicions against Ramzan Kadyrov about the cruel treatment of prisoners of war. The head of Chechnya responded with verses with insults and threats. Caucasus.realities searched what is expected in Kiev from this criminal case and whether Kadyrov is threatened with court. The first suspicions against the head of the Chechen SBU were presented in the summer of 2022. The special service said that at the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Kadyrov personally led the development and planning of separate military operations, gave orders, listened to reports, and reports of the leaders of the units of the 46th Separate Brigade of the National Guard troops. Investigators charged the head of Chechnya with 3 criminal articles: planning preparation, unleashing and waging an aggressive war, committing intentional actions with the goal of changing the borders of Ukraine, which led to the death of people and other serious consequences, and also the justification of the armed aggression of the Russian Federation, which began in 2014, the justification of the occupation, and the heroization of the people who committed the aggression. Dear SBU presenters, determine the place where we will come. We will come with pleasure and find out who is the criminal, who is the murderer, who is the terrorist. Kadyrov replied to this on the Telegram channel. True, he was not noticed in Ukraine. Now suspicions were presented to the head of the Chechen SBU in absentia on September the 1st. They relate to his statements about the first successful UAV attack on the Republic in October of last year. Then the roof of one of the buildings of the Russian Special Forces University caught fire in Gudamez, where mercenaries are being trained for the war with all of Russia. Commenting on the attack, Kadyrov said that he ordered the Chechen commanders of the Russian army at the front not to take Ukrainians captive, but to exterminate them on the spot. A few days later, the head of the Republic cancelled this order, allegedly out of considerations of humanity. In early December, after a new UAV attack, Kadyrov met with Ukrainian prisoners of war in Grozny and announced his intention to use them as human shields, which is prohibited by the Geneva Convention. One of the captured, 22-year-old Nazar Dorofeev, the head of Chechnya, offered to shoot himself under camera. These statements became the reason for the criminal case. Kadyrov commented on his verses with insults to the SBU, President Volodymyr Zelenski, the Ukrainian state, and new threats. There he was upset that only suspicions were presented to him. According to Ukrainian political scientists, the new case against Ramzan Kadyrov is explained by several factors. The key is the preparation of materials about Russian aggression for transfer to international courts. The legal system of Ukraine tries to work in a format that is typical for a democratic country where human rights are respected. In a situation of war, it is difficult, but I confidently state that the legal system of Ukraine has not slipped to the Russian repressive option. And in order to bring charges, even Kadyrov, it is necessary to collect a lot of material, commented political scientist Mikhail Sava.